we're trying to get into today, talking about consent and all these things, is we've had some current personal things, which I know that you're a little touchy on, because you've had some family trauma, which I know we don't want to get into a lot of detail on.
Sure.
But I've not really dated a lot of Latin people, but the few experiences that I've had, which is 3, you're being the third, all of them have had extensive sexual trauma from their family.
It's a weird culture, to be sure. I mean, one of the things about it, though, is that it's very, like, all-encompassing. In that, like, generally speaking, I feel like Latin communities are very similar to, like, Asian communities in the sense that they're very closed.
Sure.
Like, you just stay. You just continue. Like, it is what it is.
So my theory, and here's the thing, I understand that, like, you know, I'm by no means an expert, sure. But at the same time, when you know, again, like, I'm using only my own personal experiences and interactions and what people have told me, but 3 for 3 is like that's 100%. Like, there's no other group of people where I've dated, and I've dated pretty much every race at some point or another, where, like, first things first, like, there have been maybe 1 or 2, like, familial issues ever.
Sure.
But, like, few and far between. The people who have been assaulted, it's typically, like, not their family. It's, you know, a boyfriend, or, you know, they had an incident with a stranger, or
sure.
whatever the fuck. And, you know, and typically, like, their family responds the way a family should respond, which is the dad wants to murder the son of a bitch.
Sure.
Whereas in all 3 of the Latin situations and cases, you know, which again are just, for me, because it was within the family, yeah, there might be tensions or upsetments, but you don't want to rock the boat too much, and that's so-and-so's, you know, that's my sister's kid, or that's my whoever, so, like, you know, we can't ruin his life because that would hurt my sister, and then I wouldn't be invited to the thing. So because there's such a, like, whatever.
Well, it's both machismo, which is a whole other thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the idea that the family is a cohesive unit forever and for always.
Right.
Like, regardless of anything, it's always we are family and we need to be family, and, like, just leave it alone.
Right.
It just is what it is.
Right. I mean, I appreciate that aspect of things. Like,
sure.
I wish that my own family had not kind of fallen apart. And my family, I think, if I were to interpret it, and I'm not trying to get into details of individuals, but, like, a couple of the people kind of were the glue in the middle died. So it kind of splintered into everybody having their own new family rather than the bigger
sure.
family. And when those people died, there were legal disputes about money and arguments about money.
Which is fairly normal whenever you have a death.
Uh-huh.
There are usually people who are like, money.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, like, there was a lot of people other people in the family, again, I'm not trying to take sides here too much, but, like, some people are like, you know, you're money hungry, this is who you are, all the things, and again,
bottom line, death brings out the worst in people.
Yes, it does.
It just does.
And I feel like because I was in the military during most of this going on when people were taking sides, like, I just kind of got left out to where, like, I didn't get associated with one of the tribes that broke off.
Sure.
So
now you live here now.
I live here now, yeah. And, like, and then, like, it's really funny how, like, you'll have 2 or 3 different sides accusing me of taking a side, even though I'm not with those other people. And it's like...
Lovely.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I mean, it's amazing you're getting accused of shit. But no, like, the only person that I'm really kind of still close with was, like, you know, some of the older people who are, like, the spouses of some of the, you know, the ones that died. But anywho, I wish my family was closer, so by no means, like, there is a romantic quality to having a big family, because I grew up and my family was cohesive and large like that. So, you know, you have that. But I also think when again, like when we're talking about colleges, when you're allowed to get away with something, it incentivizes. So by no means am I saying like every male who's Latin is a rapist. That's by no means what I'm trying to say. However, when you create a culture that is the machismo, but also in the, again, time and again, I've been around families where it's like, we don't want to ruin his life. It's, it's my sister's kid. It's my whoever. We're not going to go forward to that. If you have people who are inclined towards children, who are inclined to, be predatory, who are, socially awkward, so they're not finding a mate on their own, it becomes like, well, there are vulnerable people in the family that I can exploit, and maybe they wouldn't do that if there were consequences. Because again, like if you have consequences are designed to be prohibitive. Like, when I before I had these relationships with Latin people, when I thought of machismo and I thought of male dominated culture, in my mind it was like, well, if you were to touch my daughter, that guy's going to track me down, tie me up in his basement, and torture me, because that's what I would do to somebody if they did that to my daughter. And I find that's generally not the case, except to outsiders. I've also found with Latin people that there's much more of a streak to like, for authority and for to letting police handle it, but you don't also talk to the police, which is also weird. So like, you wouldn't call the police on your own family.
No, never.
So the idea that so and so did this to your kid almost matters not at all.
Sure. I mean, it's a weird dynamic, because there's also from the kid perspective, there's also I don't want to, like, I know that my family needs to remain whole and cohesive and everybody wants to get along and nobody wants to fight. We squash everything. And then, I don't want to, because, so the thing with assault in any form, in any culture, is shame and or guilt. And so, like, the idea that you would have to deal with that, like, out loud in public, and the like, why? Well, why did this happen? Well, what was going on? And all the questions, instead of it just being like a flat blanket statement of this is what happened, it's the like, oh, now we have to deal with the guilt and
Where's
the shame of it. Yeah. You're like, well, what would people say? That.
Well, yeah, because
and from an adult perspective, it's hard enough. But can you imagine from a kid perspective? Right. Like, they're like, well,
what would outsiders think of our family?
Right. What would outsiders think of our family? What would they think of my aunt? What would they think of my uncle? What would they think of, whoever?
Which gets back to the idea of, like, perception versus reality. Like, a lot of people spend so much time and emphasis on creating the idealized version of themselves for others. It's like the Instagram reality versus the real reality. And I think to a lot of people, the Instagram reality is way more important than being just happy and sane at home.
Sure.
And I think with a lot of these families, and when you teach pride and you teach, it's the idea of like shame culture versus guilt culture.
Sure.
So like, I've talked about this before, especially in the Middle East, which I think there's more Middle Eastern tendencies with Latin culture, because there's actually a fusion there.
Sure.
Because like when you think of like, obviously when we think of Latin American culture being, South America, Central America, that sort of thing, that all came generally from Spain and Portugal, or at least the Iberian Peninsula. And then when you look at Spain, for the longest time they were conquered by Muslims. Like, it was a Muslim-centered thing. So I the idea, when I was working with a lot of the Muslim communities, that there's a kind of a Latin hybrid, even to this day in...
sure, there's like a flair.
Right. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of Latin culture in Middle Eastern culture, and then you look at, some of the places... what's the country you always wanted to go to that, like, speaks like a weird French... Morocco, yeah, that speaks like the weird French-Arab, like, twist, to where Arabs and French have no idea what the fuck they're saying.
Neither one of them like it.
Yeah, it's the only place where, like, when I used to watch Al Jazeera pretty regularly, they would subtitle it even for the native Arab speakers, because no one knew what the fuck they were saying.
Sure.
But, like, there's a fair amount of, like, Arab things, and, like, when you have the Arab culture, which is very shame-driven, so, like, when we used to run ops in Afghanistan and other countries, like, one of the biggest things that you would get asked for is alcohol. because everyone in the Middle East, all the Muslims, they drink, but to better understand that is to say that like they're not allowed to drink. So they would all like basically create like prison wine, like
Sure.
like toilet wine, and like a lot of them would get sick from drinking the concoctions they brewed in their basement. So what they wanted was the good stuff, and like providing that for them, but like you couldn't do it openly. So here's maybe a better example of that. I lived in a Mormon town.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
it's that exactly, which is, as long as we're doing it together,
right.
then we can't tell on each other.
Right.
But if you do it alone, especially in public,
right.
now we all have the right to shit on you.
Right, which is weird to me. So like they give you an example of like the Mormon thing. So there was a bar. There was only one actual bar in the Mormon town that I lived in, a really small town in Idaho. And they had this one bar. It was the only like outright bar. Like they had like bars at like restaurants and things.
Right.
So you weren't allowed to drink at the restaurants. Like there was a really good Mexican restaurant that was there, believe it or not. Like it was the one good one in all of Idaho. And it was in this because they had all the Mexican workers in the farm because it was a farming community.
So the migrant workers.
Yeah, the migrant workers.
Got it.
But they had a good Mexican restaurant. And like a lot of people would go to the Mexican restaurant. Even the Mormons were very
sure.
proud that they had like a good Mexican restaurant there. But like the Mexicans would have like tequila and all the like various cervezas and things at the restaurant. But like the Mormons were not. You would not see them doing that. But if you went to the bar, it's full of Mormons. It's not full of anybody else because everybody else just would drink at the restaurants.
Sure.
It's only full of Mormons. And you're like, but the Mormons aren't allowed to drink. But here's the thing. Because it's a bar, I can't tell on you. And
right.
here's the
because then you have to admit that you're there.
Right.
Right.
Well, like
and why would you be there?
You
if
then
you're not
have
allowed?
to justify what it is you're doing at the bar.
Right.
To begin with, to tell on somebody else. So the fact that you go in, you immediately have cover. You immediately have cover the moment you go in. So all of the Mormons would go into the bar to drink, even though they publicly never drink. But that same guy who's getting shit-faced on Friday night... And here's the thing. All debauchery takes place at that bar. Because, like, got people...
Well, that's the only place to do it.
Right. So if like, you're going to cheat on your wife, you can openly be married, go to the bar, get drunk... go home with somebody else, but nobody can say anything because why were you there? Because so if you want to cheat, if you want to drink, if you want to do whatever, you go to the bar. But the same guy who got plastered on Friday, went home with another girl, he'll go to the Mexican restaurant on Saturday, and if one guy has one beer with his restaurant,
shame.
Oh my God, the rumors to get around because he can justify what he was doing at the Mexican restaurant.
Right.
Because it's a family restaurant and I was there to eat and I was there with my family and look at what that son of a bitch was doing. And that is Muslim culture. Like it is a shame culture because it's an outward culture about what you're doing outward, whereas like Christianity tends to be a much more, you know what you did, God knows what you did, and even if no one else does.
Right.
There is an accounting for your behavior that is both spiritual and physical.
Yeah, well, it's outside of yourself. Like, you
Right.
can't control it, and you can't get out of it.
Right.
So, like, you may not want to even admit what you did, but you know you did it.
Right.
And you cannot ever get out of the accounting.
Right.